Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment on the roster and offer that amendment at this time.
No, the clerk will report the amendment.
I ask unanimous consent that the reading of the amendment be dispensed with.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Chairman, we have an obligation as a nation not to squander the capabilities developed over the past decade through the Urban Area Security Initiative grant program. The program is the only federal Homeland Security grant program that requires regional governance, strategic planning, and cooperation by a diverse group of first responders. Mr. Chairman, the Department of Homeland Security's budget of over $40 billion and over $500 billion over 10 years supports government entities counting 1,271, including 1,931 private contractors, 800,000 people who now hold top security clearances. We need to look at size, we need to look at scope, we need to look at efficiency, and overall we need to look at effectiveness. This bill eliminates funding for 33 cities deemed by the Department of Homeland Security to be high-risk and high-threat communities in this nation. These cuts occur despite the fact that we know that we need to sustain these capabilities because Al-Qaeda and its affiliates continue to plot attacks against the homeland. In fact, after the killing of Osama bin Laden, U.S. authorities have recovered evidence from his compound in Pakistan that the terror leader was encouraging followers not to limit attacks on New York City, but to consider other areas, including smaller U.S. cities, in future attacks. Including smaller U.S. cities in future attacks. Despite this, because of recent cuts to the program, this year 33 jurisdictions, including Buffalo in my district, as well as communities such as San Antonio, New Orleans, Sacramento, lost their funding for 2011. And more cities like Hampton Roads, Tampa, Detroit, Minneapolis, and Phoenix may lose their funding for 2012. This amendment supports first responders who work to protect our communities by ensuring that we invest in personnel, plans, equipment, training needed to keep us safe. The capabilities developed using this program supplement local expenditures and allow urban areas to support federal missions, specifically counterterrorism and catastrophic incident response. Without funding, most of these and other urban areas will not have the resources to sustain the high capability levels needed for disaster response. I'd like at this time to submit for the record a letter from the National Urban Area Security Initiative Association in support of this amendment and sustained investment that will maintain capability levels. My amendment simply establishes a $20 million grant program where high-risk jurisdictions, as established by the Department of Homeland Security, that were dropped from the program could compete for funding to preserve their Homeland Security capabilities. Applications would be judged on strict criteria, and only the ones best aligned with that criteria, including enhancement of regional catastrophic planning, would receive funds. With the threat level for the nation at its most heightened since 9/11, we cannot afford to see critical Homeland Security capabilities evaporate. Many of us here represent districts that were directly affected by recent irresponsible cuts to Homeland Security grant funding. By voting for my amendment, you can stand with first responders and cast a vote in favor of preserving critical preparedness capabilities. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield to my colleague from Western New York, Ms. Hochul.
Gentleman goes back. I rise in opposition to the amendment.
No, he had time left.
Oh, he did? I'm sorry.
Ms. Hochul. Ms. Hochul.
Oh, fine, okay.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Higgins. I'm not sure how you couldn't support this amendment. When you look at the list of communities that were removed from funding for this program, it's amazing. Just less than 24 hours ago, I sat down with my local team in Western New York, the Urban Area Security Team, and they pointed out to me that the Buffalo, Erie, Niagara region, upstate New York, right on the border with Canada, they are assessed to be one of the top 7 threat areas in this country because of our proximity to Toronto. I sat through very well displayed evidence here, learning about the Hezbollah presence just across the border in Canada from our community. And yet our community that Congressman Higgins and I represent was dropped. So I really question how those decisions are made, number one, but number two, how anyone could oppose restoring money under this program as under the leadership of Mr. Higgins. So I encourage everyone who represents a city that you care about, Homeland Security, to support this amendment. I'm not sure how you could vote otherwise. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlemen, you're back this time? Okay. I will speak in opposition to the amendment. If there's anything that was agreed on by the 9/11 Commission and by this committee consistently over the years, is that money should go to the areas that need it the most. That was not our decision to make where. This committee cut no cities. This was done by the Secretary of Homeland Security. She made the decision to go from 64 to 31. And to me, it would be hypocritical of us, after demanding for so many years that money be focused on those areas that need it the most, that when the Secretary makes a decision, for us to attempt to overrule her. The fact is, all of the what you're including as far as being standards in your amendment were already weighed by the Secretary. The fact is, the Secretary looked at all the reasons, whatever she factored in, she made this decision. This was not in any way coming from the Congress. This was made by Secretary Napolitano when she reduced the number, feeling that at this point in time it was essential that money be cut back and focus on those areas that need it the most. Are there other areas in the country that can use the money? Absolutely. There's always going to be areas that are targets. Anyone can be a target in this country. But the idea was to focus the money where it's needed the most. And to me, after calling on the Secretary, Secretary Ridge, Secretary Chertoff, and Secretary Napolitano, and finally Secretary Napolitano, and I give her credit for this, made the decision. Now, if I was living in one of those 33 cities that was taken off, I would not be happy. I realize that. But the fact is, we have to make tough decisions. The Secretary made it. I believe we owe it to her to stand by her, to stand by the Department when the decision was made. And to be second-guessing and to putting more money for cities that she's taking off, when would this end? I mean, she is the Secretary. In the past, when there's a money cut, we thought it was wrong. Cities have their funding cut. We objected. We spoke about it. But you don't try to overrule the Secretary. To me, it's otherwise it just becomes a way for political money to be dispensed with. And I'm not denying any of the problems that may affect Buffalo or any of the areas along the northern border, southern border. And from bin Laden's own records that there are other areas. We cannot protect every city. You cannot protect everyone. You cannot protect every region. You cannot protect every state. The purpose of Homeland Security is to provide it to the areas which, in the estimate of the department, need the money most at that time, have the most effective programs, have the programs that need it, and have been able to ramp up and do what has to be done. So now, mention New York City. New York City will never get close to back in reimbursement of what it spends. They have over 1,000 police officers alone on counterterrorism every day. The reality is that when funds are tight, the Secretary makes that decision. She's made the decision. She, on her own, went from 64 to 31. For us to overrule her, to me, would go against the spirit of the 9/11 Commission, go against the spirit of what virtually every advocate has called for. When Congressman Hamilton and Governor Kane come in here and talk about the 9/11 Commission, they always emphasize the fact that the UASI funding should be targeted and focused on the cities that need the most. Now, as far as there is money that goes to the state in the shift care programs. If the state believes that certain cities need the funding, the state can allocate that money to it. But we should not be, I believe, overriding the Secretary when she makes the tough, gut-wrenching decisions she had to make. And having said that, I'll emphasize again and again, there are any number of cities that could well be targets. But the Secretary has to draw the line somewhere. If you spend too much money everywhere, you end up defending no one. And so she has decided to protect these 31 cities. And again, that you can lobby her, talk to her, work with the administration, have your local police and fire officials and officials go to the department, argue, lobby to try to get the money reinstated for the next round of grants. But that is the Secretary's decision, and we should not be undermining the Secretary when she makes such a tough decision.
Would the Chairman yield?
Absolutely.
Again, I would just say that the Secretary is arguing against herself. Because when this program was established, it was established based on the threat and the risk by the Department of Homeland Security. And let me tell you something. Places like Buffalo don't want to be on that list. They don't want to be on that list because they are on that list. They receive special attention. And there's always new information that comes through. And as I said, this is not my information. After the killing of Osama bin Laden, U.S. intelligence authorities have recovered evidence from his compound in Pakistan that the terror leader was encouraging his followers not to limit attacks to New York City, but to consider other areas, including smaller U.S. cities, in future attacks, including the 33 cities that the Secretary has eliminated. And we are a co-equal branch of government, and we don't accept fully everything that the Secretary says. And I think we have an obligation to consider new information that may be available, which should force a reconsideration of that policy decision made by the Department of Homeland Security.
Yeah, actually, let me just finish my time, then I have to go to the briefing with the ranking member, and Chairman Lundgren will assume the chair. Bin Laden was killed before the Secretary, I believe, made the decision. But in any event, all the available evidence was before the Secretary and the Obama administration. This was the decision that they made, and I believe it would be wrong of us to set the precedent of, by congressional fiat, trying to override what the Secretary has done, especially when virtually every advocate on Homeland Security for the last 7 years has been saying that the number of cities should be reduced to make the funding more effective. And with that, I have to yield back.
Could the chairman yield